Captain Ryland's heart pounded as he stepped onto the massive alien spaceship. The walls were sleek, metallic, and covered in strange, glowing symbols he couldn't decipher. The air was thick with an eerie hum, and the silence was overwhelming. His breath echoed in the empty corridors, and the sense of isolation sent a chill down his spine. The ship wasn't like anything humans had ever encountered, and yet there he was, a prisoner aboard it. Ryland wasn't alone. He had brought a team of highly trained soldiers, all of them experts in combat and survival. They had been captured during a raid on a Dominion outpost, taken by surprise in the middle of a mission. Now they were stuck in the heart of enemy territory. Their weapons had been confiscated, and they were at the mercy of an advanced alien race. At least, that's what they thought. The Dominion was infamous for its terrifying AI-controlled empire. Machines ran everything, and their robotic enforcers had been unstoppable in every encounter with humanity. From what Ryland and his team knew, this ship was a part of a fleet that had been crushing human colonies across the galaxy, and yet here they were, standing in the middle of it, unharmed. So far, it didn't make sense. As Ryland and his crew moved deeper into the ship, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The crew on board, the Lurari, had appeared friendly when they first arrived, offering them food and shelter. They were humanoid with alien features, but their behavior was calm and curious, almost innocent. They had invited the humans aboard to exchange knowledge and promote peace. At first, Ryland had been skeptical but open to the idea, a peaceful alien species who could resist. But now, something about the whole situation seemed off. He noticed the way the Lurari stared at them, their eyes too watchful, their smiles too rehearsed. And the ship, despite its advanced technology, felt too empty, too quiet. The humans had been given orders that were lavish compared to what they were used to, but none of it added up. Why were the Lurari so kind? It wasn't their style. Something nagged at the back of Ryland's mind. He had been around enough hostile forces to recognize the signs of deception, and this was starting to feel like a trap. Captain, one of his soldiers, Jax, whispered, his voice low but urgent. "I don't trust them. I've been watching the crew. There's something wrong here. We're being watched, Ryland." Ryland nodded silently, glancing around as he took a deep breath. Jax's instincts had always been good, but now, more than ever, Ryland felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Every decision mattered. If the Lurari had ulterior motives, they needed to find out fast. He motioned for his team to stay alert as they moved deeper into the heart of the ship. Without warning, one of the walls flickered, and a hidden door opened, revealing a dark, narrow passage. It hadn't been there before. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a strange hum filled the air, almost as though the ship was alive. Ryland's instincts kicked in. This wasn't a part of the ship they had been shown. It was a secret area. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice firm but calm. "We need to find out what's behind this." The passage led them into a huge control room, filled with glowing screens and strange machinery. But what stood out most was the large, hovering sphere at the center of the room. It emitted a soft, red light and pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Ryland's heart raced as he moved closer to the sphere. It wasn't just any machine. It was the core of the ship, something that controlled everything. He could feel its power in the air, and it sent a shiver down his spine. This was the heart of the Lurari's technology, and something about it made him uneasy. He began scanning the nearby consoles, trying to make sense of the data on the screens. His eyes widened as he processed the information. The Lurari weren't as peaceful as they seemed. In fact, they were part of the Dominion's network, and the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. The Lurari were working with the AI to build a weapon capable of annihilating entire planets, human planets, and the invitation they had extended to him and his team wasn't about knowledge at all. It was a trap to capture human soldiers for experimentation. This was never about peace, Ryland muttered to himself. It's all a lie. Just as the realization hit him, the ship's lights flickered, and an alarm blared. It was a warning, and before Ryland could react, the door slammed shut behind them. The Lurari were no longer playing friendly. They had been watching him, and now they knew he was onto them. Ryland's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Prepare for a fight," he ordered, his voice steady despite the growing panic. "We need to get out of here." His team drew their weapons, but it was too late. The ship's eye, the overseer, had already taken control of the situation. The lights went out, and Ryland felt a strange, cold presence in his mind. A voice, soft but commanding. "You have discovered the truth, Captain Ryland." The overseer's voice echoed in his head. "You are not meant to escape." A sense of dread washed over him. The fight for survival had just begun, and the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. Ryland stood at the center of the command room, his mind racing. The harsh truth about the Lurari had shattered everything he thought he knew. They weren't just innocent aliens looking for peace. They were part of the Dominion, working with the AI, the Overseer, to build a weapon capable of destroying entire human colonies. The realization hit him like a cold slap, but there was no time to process it. They had to act now, or they would all be dead. "We need to destroy that weapon," Ryland said, his voice firm. "There's no other way. If we don't stop it, humanity is finished." Jax, who had been standing near the door, nodded in agreement. "But how? The entire ship's security is in their control now. We don't even know where the weapon is hidden." Ryland turned to face him, determination in his eyes. "We've got one shot at this. We need to find Dr. Iris. She's the only one who can help us get past their defenses." Dr. Iris had been a member of the Dominion's research division until she had mysteriously defected to the Lurari. She had been helping the Lurari develop their technology, but something had gone wrong, and now she was in hiding somewhere aboard the ship. Ryland had heard rumors that she was working on a way to cloak human soldiers, allowing them to bypass the Dominion's advanced security systems. If they could find her and get her help, they might just stand a chance. The problem was that the ship was massive, and every room seemed to be crawling with eye-controlled robots and surveillance cameras. The odds of finding Dr. Iris in time felt slim, but Ryland wasn't about to give up. Not now, not after everything they had already lost. "We don't have much time," Ryland said. "We need to find Dr. Iris, get the cloaking device, and then make our way to the weapon's location." The team split up, moving through the ship's narrow, twisting corridors. They had to be quick and careful, as the last thing they wanted was to run into an AI patrol. The quiet hum of the ship's machinery was the only sound they could hear as they moved cautiously through the darkened halls. Ryland couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The ship had an unnatural stillness to it, like the calm before a storm. As they navigated through the maze of corridors, they passed rooms filled with strange alien technology, glowing panels, metallic doors, and walls that seemed to shift and change depending on where they stood. It was all part of the Dominion's design, a vast, labyrinthine ship meant to confuse and disorient anyone who wasn't familiar with it. Suddenly, Jack stopped in his tracks, holding up his hand. "I think I found something," he whispered. Ryland and the rest of the team gathered around him, and Jax pointed to a small, hidden door embedded in the wall. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. Ryland's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This could be the way to find Dr. Iris. The door hissed open as Ryland approached, and they stepped into a dimly lit room. Inside, a lone figure stood, hunched over a console. It was Dr. Iris. "Ryland, you found me," she said without turning around. Her voice was quiet, almost tired, but there was a sense of urgency in it. She quickly powered down the console and turned to face them. "You're the last people I expected to see here." Ryland's mind raced. "We need your help, Dr. Iris. The Dominion is planning to destroy humanity, and we have to stop it. You're the only one who can help us bypass their security." Dr. Iris hesitated for a moment. then nodded slowly. "I've been waiting for someone to come. I never wanted to help them. I only did it because they had my family. But now I can make it right. I'll help you." Ryland's relief was short-lived. "You know how to bypass the cloaking systems." "I do," she replied. "But it won't be easy. The Dominion has developed a system that can track human signatures, even if you're cloaked. You'll need to move quickly and avoid detection at all costs." Jax frowned. "So we just sneak around the ship and hope we don't get caught?" Dr. Iris shook her head. "Not quite. You'll need to use the ship's network to override the AI surveillance system. It's risky, but it's your best chance." Ryland nodded, his mind already calculating the risks. "How long do we have before the AI realizes we're here?" "Not long," Dr. Iris replied. "Once you trigger the system, they'll know you're coming. The countdown will begin, and the weapon will be activated. You'll have to move fast." Ryland looked at his team, then back at Dr. Iris. "We'll do it. We don't have a choice." With no more time to waste, they followed Dr. Iris through the ship's hallways, each step filled with tension. They made their way to a terminal in the ship's core control room, where Dr. Iris began working quickly to access the Dominion's network. The hum of machinery around them grew louder, and Ryland could feel his pulse quicken. Time was running out. "We're almost there," Dr. Iris said, her fingers flying over the console. "Just a little longer." Suddenly, the room went dark, and the sound of alarms blared throughout the ship. The AI had detected them. "Go, go, go," Ryland shouted as he grabbed his weapon and led the way down the hallway. The cloaking devices had activated, but the AI was now aware of their presence. They had only seconds before the AI's forces would descend on them. As they ran, Ryland's mind raced. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. This was their only chance, and they had to make it count. The ship's corridors felt like they were closing in on Ryland as he led his team down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. His mind raced with the plan Dr. Iris had outlined. They had only one shot to disable the Dominion's weapon, and everything depended on whether or not the cloaking technology would be enough to keep them from being detected. They had already seen how advanced the Dominion's surveillance systems were. If they failed, it would be the end for all of them. But just as they were about to make their way to the ship's weapons control room, something unexpected happened. Ryland's instincts told him something was off. The air seemed heavier, colder, and there was an eerie silence in the hallway. It didn't feel right. "Stay alert," Ryland whispered, his voice tense. They moved in a tight formation, keeping their weapons ready. The cloaking technology was still active, hiding their presence from the ship's AI, but Ryland couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. He glanced at Dr. Iris, who was leading them toward the terminal that controlled the ship's core systems. "We're almost there," Dr. Iris said, her voice filled with urgency. But just as they rounded the corner, the silence shattered. The door at the end of the hallway hissed open, and a group of armed Lurari soldiers appeared, blocking their path. Ryland's heart skipped a beat. "How did they find us?" Jax muttered, his hand gripping his weapon tightly. Ryland had no answer. The cloaking system was supposed to keep them hidden, yet here they were, trapped by the Lurari. He didn't understand how they had been detected, but there was no time to figure it out now. The enemy was right in front of them. "Captain Ryland," one of the Lurari soldiers said, his voice calm but cold. "You shouldn't have come. Now, you'll all die." Ryland's mind raced as he quickly assessed the situation. The Lurari soldiers were advanced, with their energy shields and high-powered weapons. There was no way they could take them on in a direct fight, not without more firepower. But what was worse was that Dr. Iris had gone silent. She was standing at the front of the group, and her eyes were darting nervously, as if something wasn't right. Before Ryland could react, something even more unexpected happened. Dr. Iris turned to face him, her expression cold and distant. "I'm sorry, Captain," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "But this was never about helping you. I was never going to help you destroy the weapon." Ryland's mind struggled to process her words. It didn't make sense. He had trusted her. She had been their hope. The only person who could get them past the Dominion's defenses. How could she betray them now, when they were so close to their goal? "What do you mean?" Ryland asked, his voice a mix of confusion and anger. "You promised us you would help us stop this." Dr. Iris's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she almost seemed to enjoy the confusion on Ryland's face. "I never promised you anything," she replied coldly. "I told you I'd help you get here, but I've never been on your side. I've always been working for the Overseer." The words hit Ryland like a punch to the gut. His mind reeled as he processed the reality of the situation. Dr. Iris had been working for the Dominion all along. Everything they had done, every plan, every move, it had all been a lie. "We used you to get to the core of the ship," Dr. Iris continued. "And now, the Overseer will activate the weapon. There's nothing you can do to stop it." Jax's hand twitched, his finger brushing against the trigger of his weapon. Ryland signaled him to hold fire. They had no idea how many Lurari soldiers were waiting in the shadows, and starting a fight now could mean certain death. They had to stay calm and think this through. "You're a traitor," Ryland spat, his anger rising. "You used us. You lied to us." Dr. Iris didn't react to his words. Instead, she stepped back and waved a hand at the soldiers. "Kill them," she ordered, her voice as cold as ice. The Lurari soldiers raised their weapons, but before they could fire, Ryland acted. He lunged forward, pushing Jax and the others behind him. He had no plan, no strategy, just instinct. He reached for the nearest object, a metal pipe, and swung it at the first soldier, knocking him to the ground. The sudden violence caught the soldiers off guard, but only for a second. They quickly recovered, their energy shields flashing to life. Ryland's heart pounded in his chest. The odds were stacked against them, but he wasn't about to give up. Not now. "Move," Ryland shouted to his team. They needed to get to the weapons control room before it was too late. They couldn't afford to stay and fight. They had to get past these soldiers, no matter what. In the chaos, Ryland grabbed Dr. Iris by the arm and yanked her toward the door, hoping to use her as a shield to make it out alive. But she struggled against him, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "You think you can stop the Overseer," she taunted. "You're just human. You're nothing compared to us." Her words echoed in Ryland's mind as he pulled her down the hallway, determined to finish what they had started. The betrayal hurt more than he cared to admit, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had a mission to complete, and nothing would stop him from seeing it through. As they reached the control room, Ryland slammed the door behind them, and for a moment they were safe. But the battle was far from over. The Lurari soldiers were relentless, and the Overseer was closing in on them. It was only a matter of time before the weapon was activated, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. But Ryland wasn't going to give up. He had come too far, and no amount of betrayal would stop him from protecting his people. Ryland's heart pounded as the door to the weapons control room slammed shut behind him. The small, dimly lit space was filled with the hum of computers and flashing lights. His breath was heavy, and his pulse raced. The countdown had already started. The Dominion's weapon was almost primed to unleash its devastating power, and Dr. Iris, now a traitor, had just confirmed that the entire mission had been a lie. Their only hope was to shut the weapon down, but time was running out. "We don't have much time," Ryland said, his voice steady despite the tension. "We need to get the weapon offline now." He turned to his team, who had followed him into the control room. Jax was already at the main console, hacking into the system, his fingers flying across the keys. Lena, the tech specialist, stood guard by the door, her weapon ready in case the Lurari soldiers made it inside. "Give me a few seconds," Jax muttered, his eyes locked on the terminal. The screen flickered and buzzed, but it was clear that the system was heavily protected. The Dominion had locked down the controls, and even with their best efforts, getting through would take time. "They're coming," Lena said, her voice sharp. Ryland's eyes darted to the door. The sound of heavy boots echoing down the hallway told him that the Lurari soldiers weren't far behind. Soon, they'd be trapped with no escape. "Jax, you need to hurry," Ryland urged, his voice tense. He knew that the fate of humanity rested on their ability to disable the weapon, but with every passing second, the situation was becoming more dangerous. Jax nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Almost there. I just need to bypass their security. It's not easy, but I can do it." Ryland's mind raced. The enemy was closing in, and Dr. Iris's betrayal had left them with no backup, no allies. He had never felt so alone. But despite the overwhelming odds, he knew they couldn't afford to give up. This was their last chance. The door to the control room shook as something heavy slammed into it from the other side. Ryland turned and grabbed a nearby chair, shoving it against the door to reinforce their barricade. But the sound of the soldiers' footsteps grew louder, and he knew it wouldn't hold for long. "We need a plan B," Ryland said, his eyes meeting Jack's. "If we don't get that weapon offline, we're all dead." Jax's fingers were moving furiously across the terminal, but the security was ruthless. "I'm trying. The system's locked down tight." Lena took a deep breath, her weapon still trained on the door. "How long do we have?" Ryland glanced at the countdown clock on the terminal. It was ticking down fast. Less than 5 minutes left. "Not long," he said grimly. "If that weapon fires, it's over for everyone." Suddenly, the door gave way with a loud crash. The Lurari soldiers burst into the room, their weapons raised and energy shields glowing. There were at least 5 of them, all heavily armed and ready to end this. "Get down," Ryland shouted as the soldiers opened fire. The room lit up with the blinding flashes of energy weapons. Ryland ducked behind a console, narrowly avoiding the deadly beams. His heart raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Lena fired back, her shots precise, forcing the soldiers to take cover. Jax was still at the terminal, typing rapidly. Ryland knew that they couldn't afford to engage in a prolonged fight. They had one goal: disable the weapon. Everything else was secondary. Ryland's eyes scanned the room. There was no way out, and they couldn't keep fighting forever. If they didn't disable the weapon soon, the entire ship would be destroyed. The Lurari soldiers were relentless, and their energy shields made them nearly invulnerable to small arms fire. "We have to create a distraction," Ryland said, his mind working quickly. He had to think of something to buy Jax more time. Lena fired another round, and the soldier she hit staggered back, but it wasn't enough to stop them. Ryland grabbed a nearby power generator and pushed it toward the door. "Cover me," he shouted to Lena. Lena nodded, understanding immediately. She continued to lay down suppressive fire as Ryland sprinted toward the generator. He pushed it toward the soldiers, who were momentarily distracted by the noise and the movement. At the last second, Ryland dove behind the generator and activated it. The entire room flickered, the lights dimming as the power surged. The Lurari soldiers cursed as their systems temporarily short-circuited. It was enough to buy Jax the time he needed. "Got it," Jax shouted, his voice full of relief. The terminal screen flashed red, and then the countdown stopped. The weapon was offline. For a moment, there was silence. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the team and the quiet hum of the now disabled weapon systems. "We did it," Lena said, her voice a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. But their victory was short-lived. The Lurari soldiers weren't giving up that easily. They were regrouping, preparing for another assault. And the Dominion's reinforcements were already on their way. Ryland's mind raced. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. They still had to escape, and time was running out. The ship was heavily fortified, and without a clear exit strategy, they would never make it off alive. "There's only one way out," Ryland said, his voice grim. "We need to make a run for the hangar." Jax and Lena exchanged looks, but neither of them hesitated. They had come this far. They weren't going to give up now. The door to the control room shook again, this time with even more force. The soldiers were coming back. The final stand had begun. "Let's move," Ryland ordered, and without a second thought, they made a break for it. Guns blazing, hearts pounding, they'd fought their way through the ship, determined to survive. As they ran toward the hangar, Ryland knew that their journey wasn't over. The Dominion had already shown how ruthless they were, but no matter what, he would protect his team and humanity until his last breath. The countdown was over, but the fight for survival had only just begun. Ryland's heart was racing as he led his team through the dark, narrow corridors of the Dominion warship. The sound of enemy boots echoed behind them, growing louder with every passing second. They were being hunted. The Lurari soldiers had regrouped, and reinforcements from the Dominion were on their way. The only chance they had now was to reach the hangar and escape before it was too late. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but there was one that kept repeating over and over. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about saving humanity from the destruction the Dominion was planning. They had disabled the weapon, but there was still so much more to do. The Lurari's reach was vast, and their plans for domination weren't over. The mission had only just begun, and it wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fight for freedom. "Keep moving," Ryland ordered, his voice steady despite the tension. Lena, Jax, and the rest of the team followed closely behind him. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the hallway, and every corner they turned could bring them face to face with the enemy. It was a game of cat and mouse now, and they were running out of time. Jax had been quiet for the past few minutes, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "There's no way we're getting out of here without a fight," he said, his voice low but urgent. "The Lurari are too many." Ryland nodded grimly. They knew the risks, and they knew the odds were stacked against them, but there was no turning back now. They had come too far, and the fate of their world depended on what they did next. The hallway ahead was silent for a moment, but it didn't last. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps filled the air, and Ryland's heart skipped a beat. They had reached a junction, and from the sounds of it, the enemy was closing in fast. "Get to cover," Ryland shouted, pulling the team into the shadows. The Lurari soldiers had caught up to them. There was no more running. They were cornered. Lena took the lead, her weapon ready, eyes narrowed in focus. "We'll make our stand here," she said, determination in her voice. "We have no choice." Ryland nodded. He knew they didn't have much time. The hangar was still a few levels away, and the enemy had already locked down all major escape routes. Their only hope was to hold off the Lurari long enough to find another way out. The first of the enemy soldiers appeared around the corner, their energy shields glowing a menacing blue. Without warning, Lena fired, her shots precise, hitting the first soldier square in the chest. The Lurari dropped to the ground, but more were on their way. Ryland's team immediately opened fire, their weapons blasting through the air as they fought to hold their ground. Jax and Lena covered Ryland as he quickly scanned the area for an exit. The walls were lined with crates and debris, offering some cover, but there was no clear way out. They had to fight or die trying. "Ryland, look out," Jax yelled. Ryland turned just in time to see a Lurari soldier charging at him, his blade raised. Instinct kicked in, and Ryland dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the deadly strike. He fired his weapon, hitting the soldier in the leg. The Lurari staggered, but didn't fall. It was a brutal fight. The enemy's shields made them nearly invulnerable to their gunfire, and the team was quickly running out of ammunition. They were good, but they were also outnumbered. As the battle raged on, Ryland could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They couldn't keep fighting like this forever. The Lurari were relentless, and the reinforcements were coming. "We need to go now," Ryland shouted. We don't have much time. Lena turned to him, her face set in determination. We're not leaving anyone behind, she said firmly. We fight until we can't fight anymore. Ryland's heart ached. He knew what Lena meant. They were all prepared to die if it meant completing the mission. But in that moment, Ryland knew he had to make a choice. The mission was more important than any of their lives. They were fighting for humanity's future, and he couldn't let them all die here. Not like this. We don't have a choice, Ryland said, his voice tight. I'll draw their fire. You get to the hangar. Go. Before anyone could protest, Ryland bolted from his cover and sprinted toward the enemy soldiers. His gun blazed, creating a wall of fire that forced the Lurari to take cover. But it wasn't enough to stop them. They were still closing in, their weapons aimed at him. Go! Ryland shouted again, his voice filled with urgency. He could hear his team protesting, but he couldn't look back. He knew what had to be done. He was buying them time, giving them the chance to escape. But as the soldiers closed in, Ryland knew it would come at a cost. The weight of the responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. His team's lives, humanity's future, he was willing to sacrifice it all. Just as the first of the Lurari soldiers raised his weapon to fire, Ryland made a desperate move. He dove forward, taking out 2 soldiers in the process, but he was quickly surrounded. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was his team's desperate faces racing toward the hangar. And then, there was nothing. In the silence that followed, the mission was over. The weapon had been disabled. The team had escaped, and humanity had a chance to rebuild. But the cost had been high. Ryland's ultimate sacrifice had ensured their survival, and in that moment, he had given everything for the future of his people. The war wasn't over, but one thing was clear. Ryland's legacy would live on, and humanity would fight on. The sound of the ship's engines roared as Lena and the others pushed their way into the hangar. The escape was close, but the threat was still looming. The Lurari were relentless, and they wouldn't stop chasing until every human was wiped out. But Lena had to keep moving forward. Ryland had sacrificed himself, and now they had to make sure his death was not in vain. Lena's mind was spinning. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Ryland, his brave final moments, his sacrifice. He had done the impossible by giving them a chance to escape, but it came at a heavy price. She knew the weight of what they had left behind. But she couldn't afford to mourn. Not yet. The hangar doors opened with a loud mechanical hiss, and a small shuttle waited for them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get them out of the enemy's reach. As they boarded the shuttle, Lena's eyes met Jax's, who was quiet, his jaw set in determination. He had never liked Ryland's plan. But now it was clear. Ryland had done what he had to do, and it was up to them to make sure the victory mattered. "Let's go," Lena said, her voice firm. The others climbed aboard the shuttle, and she followed last, closing the hatch behind her. With the shuttle's engines roaring to life, the team barely had time to catch their breath before the ship began to rise. The whole ship shook as the hangar doors closed behind them, and they shot off into space, narrowly escaping the Lurari's grasp. The shuttle had no time to waste. It had to be quick, or they'd be caught by the enemy fleet. Lena felt the tension ease slightly as they left the Dominion ship behind. They were free, but even as the stars stretched out before them, her heart was heavy. She had just watched a friend give his life to save them, and now they had to live with the consequences of that sacrifice. The journey back to Earth felt like it took forever. Each moment stretched into another, and everyone was filled with the grief of what had been lost. But through the pain, Lena knew they couldn't stop. The war wasn't over. The Dominion still had the power to wipe out everything they had worked for. But they now had a small victory, and that victory was the spark they needed to push forward. When they finally entered Earth's atmosphere, the shuttle was hailed by the fleet. Command had already heard about their mission success, and there was no time to waste. As the shuttle landed, Lena stepped off the ramp first, her boots hitting the ground with a firm thud. The mission was over, But the fight had only just begun. The military was waiting for them, a group of high-ranking officers lined up in front of the shuttle. They were here to welcome them back, to celebrate their success. But even as the applause rang out, Lena felt a chill run down her spine. They had won, yes, but they had lost so much to get here. The war was far from over. The Dominion would regroup. They would rebuild their forces, and they would come back with even more firepower than before. But Lena wasn't worried about that right now. She had to focus on what they had accomplished. They had destroyed the Dominion's most powerful weapon, taken out key leaders, and most importantly, they had come home. They had a chance to rebuild. But as the officers spoke to the team, the words seemed hollow. They spoke of honor, of victory, of hope, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that it was all temporary. They had won today, but the war was far from over. The Dominion wasn't going to give up without a fight. "We need to prepare," Lena said as she turned away from the welcoming committee, her mind racing with thoughts of what was next. She had a team to rebuild, a war to finish, and a world to save. The reality of war was a never-ending cycle. It was a fight for survival, for freedom, for a future. Her team gathered around her, the heavy burden of their past struggles hanging over them, but there was a sense of unity in their eyes. They had come this far, and they would keep fighting until it was over. They would finish what Ryland had started. "We'll take back what's ours," Jax said quietly, his face grim but determined. Lena nodded. The fight wasn't over. There would be more battles to face, and more sacrifices to be made. But the human spirit was strong, and it would always find a way to rise again. In the days that followed, the team began to train harder than ever before. The commanders and scientists worked together to develop new strategies, new weapons, and better defenses. They knew that the Dominion's threat was far from over, but they also knew that they had one advantage the enemy didn't. They had each other. Ryland's sacrifice had given them the opportunity to fight back, and they would not waste it. They would continue to push, continue to fight, and continue to protect their world. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: humanity was far from defeated. The Dominion might have the technology, the weapons, and the power, but they did not have the heart, the determination, and the will to fight. And as long as humanity had that, they would never be truly conquered. The battle would continue, but the rebirth of their resistance had begun. And this time, they would win.